everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Kevin, and in my last video I stated that I was going to present two scientific arguments for the existence of God. I presented the first one, and then when I got done with that I noticed that the video was just getting really long, so I decided to cut it there and move on and do the second argument in the next video, which is what you're watching now. So just to recap my first video, I went through the cosmological argument for the existence of God. And that argument is as follows. Premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, the universe has a cause. I gave reasons to show that each premise is true and that the logical move from the premises to the conclusion is valid, and that the conclusion that the universe has a cause and there's a causing agent behind the universe coming to existence is necessarily true. And I also provided reasons to show that the cause of the universe would have to be God and that no other causal explanation is adequate. So if that kind of material interests you, I highly recommend that you go back and watch that video first, and that'll help lay the framework for this video here. So that brings me to the second scientific argument for the existence of God that I want to cover, the teleological argument. So the root word for teleological is telos, which means goal or purpose. And this argument is basically getting after how our universe was fine-tuned to be life permitting and not life prohibiting. In other words, there's a long list of conditions that have to be perfectly met in order for the planet to support life and in order for the universe to be life permitting. So regarding the planet, astronomer Carl Sagan has since announced that there are over 200 conditions that all must be perfectly met in order for the Earth to support life. And if any one of these conditions is off ever so slightly, then the planet cannot support life on it whatsoever. So I'm not going to go through all 200 of those conditions in this video, but I did want to list a few examples. One example would be the distance between the Earth and the Sun. That distance has to be extremely precise, because if the Earth was closer to the Sun than it is, then it would be too hot for the planet to support life. And if it was too far away from the Sun, then it would be too cold for the planet to support life. Another example of this fine-tuning has to do with the thickness of the Earth's crust. If the Earth's crust thickness is anything other than what it is, then that would affect the levels of oxygen being emitted into the Earth, and that would also affect the volcanic activity of the Earth, making the Earth unstable to support life. And another example of the fine-tuning for the Earth, I'm going to point to Jupiter for this example, because Jupiter is a very gravity-rich planet that draws away asteroids away from Earth. And if we didn't have a gravity-rich planet like Jupiter nearby, then all of the asteroids would be drawn to the Earth from Earth's gravitational field, and we would not be able to have life on the planet due to all the asteroids that would be hitting it and things of that nature. So those are just some examples of the fine-tuning of the Earth, and remember, there's over 200 that have to be perfectly met, and that scales in comparison to the fine-tuning necessary for the universe to be life permitting as opposed to being life prohibiting. So I'm going to refer to my notes here just to make sure I get this right. Astronomer Paul Davies has stated that the four fundamental forces, the gravitational force, the electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, and the weak nuclear force, were all determined within 1/1,000,000th of a second after the Big Bang. And the ratios between each of these forces had to be perfectly balanced to extreme precision in order for stars and galaxies to form. I mean, that's an incredible piece of fine-tuning right there. And another example of fine-tuning as it pertains to the universe would be the expansion rate of the universe, the initial expansion rate after the Big Bang. Because if the universe expanded too quickly, then matter would dissipate and would not be able to come together to form into galaxies, and galaxies and planets would have never formed. And if the expansion rate was too slow, then the universe would have contracted back on itself due to the gravitational force. So scientists are telling us that if the expansion rate of the universe was off by more than 1 part in 10 to the 37th power, or if the density of the universe was off by more than 1 part in 10 to the 59th power, then absolutely no life-capable galaxies or planets would have ever formed. And those are some very, very large numbers. The range of acceptable values of the expansion rate and all these other components of fine tuning, the range is so tiny that if you're off by even the slightest sliver, then our universe cannot be life permitting, and neither can the planet be life permitting. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what I'm referring to by the fine tuning for the universe, and it just opens your eyes to the large number of conditions that have to be met in order for us to be able to exist on the planet at all. So, premise one of the teleological argument states that the fine tuning of the universe is due to necessity, chance, or intelligent design. And no sophisticated atheist that I've ever listened to would ever challenge this premise of the argument because it encompasses all possible explanations for the fine tuning. There is no fourth option. I mean, if you're aware of a fourth one that I haven't thought of, please put it in the comments below because I'd love to consider it. But I can't think of one. So the three possible explanations for the fine tuning are necessity, chance, or intelligent design. So premise one is true. Premise two, the fine tuning of the universe is not due to necessity or chance. Conclusion, the fine tuning of the universe is due to intelligent design. So premise two is basically ruling out two of the three options. And if only one option of three remains, then that has to be the correct option. So let's take a deeper look at premise two to see if it's true. Can necessity or chance account for the fine tuning of the universe? And let me address necessity first. That's basically saying that the universe had to come about the way it is out of necessity, basically. I just seem to be repeating myself with that word, but it's basically saying that it's not possible for any other type of universe to have come into existence by natural means. But I think we have good reasons to show that that's just not true. Mathematic physicist Roger Penrose calculated that the odds against a life-permitting universe are 1 part in 10 to the 10th power to the 123rd power. That means that there's a large array of other universes that could have come into existence, and ours is just one out of this huge number. There's no reason to think that our universe, out of the pool of available options, had to be the one that came into existence. So based on this calculation, we can see that it's far more probable for some other for some other life prohibiting universe to come into existence as opposed to a life permitting universe to come into existence. And I've been doing some reading from from some of my favorite apologists online, like Frank Turek, William Lane Craig, Stand to Reason. And I've came across several articles that have talked about how a number of scientists have been turning to theism because of the modern scientific knowledge surrounding the design of the universe and the fine tuning. It's becoming more apparent to them that our universe was designed and that natural means alone cannot account for it. So I think we have good reason here to rule out necessity as a possible explanation for the fine tuning of the universe. But what about chance? Oh, actually, sorry, I got a little bit ahead of myself. I just wanted to state that there is no scientific evidence or principle of science to support that necessity is the correct option here. There's no evidence to back it up whatsoever. So what about chance? Was the universe fine-tuned by chance? Did our universe just happen to beat the inconceivable odds? Did we just get lucky? Well, I think Roger Penrose's calculation shows that this option is so improbable that it can't even be entertained. I mean, if our universe came about by chance, that would be like picking a red golf ball out of a sea of 10 quintillion white golf balls while blindfolded. Or I guess you could say it'd be like flipping a quarter 10 quintillion times and having it land heads every time. I mean, the chances of that happening is so unlikely that it's not even rational to entertain the thought. And that basically applies to our universe here. There is no reason to believe that our universe just came about by chance, and the probabilities involved show that such a view is ludicrous, really, to use a strong term there. It is borderline idiotic to think that our universe just happened to come about because we got lucky. Now, I'm not calling the people who may think that's stupid. I'm addressing the view itself. It's just not a smart view or position to take, because the evidence against it is so strong, as we've covered here in this video and in the last video as well. So what about the multiverse? Can this account for chance? So in my last video, I addressed the multiverse, and basically, just to recap, the multiverse theory posits that there is an actual infinite number of universes, and that our universe is just one of this infinite number of universes. And in my previous video, I gave a number of reasons for us to think that actual infinites are impossible. They cannot exist in reality. But even with that said, a lot of atheists and unbelievers out there still offer the multiverse theory as an explanation for how our universe came to be. And basically, a subset of this theory says that as universes become created in this soon-to-be infinite number of them, eventually a life-permitting universe would come into existence by chance. That's basically the thinking. So not only can the multiverse theory not account for the cause of the first universe, and not only is it impossible for an actual infinite number of universes to come into existence, but even if it were true that our universe just came out into existence out of this infinite cycle by chance, then that means that the black hole that our particular universe came from in the previous universe would require its own fine-tuning and explanation for that fine-tuning. And if I didn't state this already, the multiverse theory says that one universe is basically spawns from a previous universe through their black hole. Well, once the black hole pressure increases so tightly, it explodes and results in another universe coming to existence. And I kind of dive into that in a little more depth in my last video as well. So anyways, what I'm trying to highlight here is that if this were true, the black hole that our universe spawned from in the previous universe would itself require a very large degree of fine-tuning. So it doesn't really solve the problem. It just pushes it back. Now the fine-tuning of that black hole requires an explanation, and there are just a large number of problems with the multiverse theory that we've already covered here and in my last video. So I think you can rule that out as a possible explanation for our universe being life permitting. Now, some people would be quick to point to evolution, and I don't think evolution can account for this at all either. So when it comes to evolution, I think it's important to draw a distinction between microevolution and macroevolution. Microevolution basically addresses changes in individual species, but those species never evolve into a whole nother chordate lineage or another species. Whereas macroevolution is the view that all life evolved from one singular cell over time. And while I do think there's reasons to think that microevolution is true, I don't think there's any evidence for macroevolution at all. And with respect to the teleological argument, atheists offer macroevolution as an explanation for it, at least for part of it, as an explanation for how life on the planet is possible and, according to them, evolved to the life forms that we have today. So there's a few problems with that. One is macroevolution cannot account for the DNA and genetic code in living organisms. So, and I'm not a scientist, so I'm going to be speaking in layman's terms here, but DNA basically contains the instructions for how cells are to grow and develop. And Stephen Meyer is a great resource on this. He's a scientist. I've read his books on this subject, and I'd highly recommend checking him out. But our genetic code in the human race has instructions in the DNA for how our cells and our body are to develop. And that is true for all living organisms. And the type of instructions necessary or the type of instructions embedded in our DNA code is extremely complex and precise, thus implying that it was intelligently designed. I mean, similar to our computer code. Nobody would look at computer code for programs and conclude that just happened to meet those perfectly met sequences of letters and computer programming by chance or necessity. I mean, people would look at that and correctly conclude that it was designed and ordered that way. And the same thing can be said of our DNA and genetic code. So, evolution cannot account for how our genetic code and DNA is the way that it is, as opposed to it evolving into some other genetic code or some other coordinate lineage or no lineage at all. I'd also add that macroevolution cannot account for that first life form, that first cell. It can't explain how that came into existence, and macroevolution most certainly cannot explain the conditions necessary for the planet to be life permitting. I mean, macroevolution only addresses the life forms that are already on the planet. It cannot explain the 200 conditions required for the planet to be life permitting, and it certainly can't explain the even greater conditions necessary for the universe to support life at all. So I don't think macroevolution can be used to support chance as an option for the fine-tuning of the universe. So that basically leaves us, let me go back to my other slide, that basically leaves us with one alternative, that the fine-tuning of the universe is due to intelligent design. And I think that is so incredibly obvious as we continue to study our universe. I mean, when we study our galaxies, our galaxy and other galaxies that we can see, when we study the cosmos, it's just so beautiful and wonderfully made that to claim that it wasn't intelligently designed is, in my opinion, just a very foolish claim. I mean, Paul thought the same thing. Paul in Scripture wrote that the fool has said, well, actually, I don't remember if Paul wrote this verse. I'm going off the top of my head here, but Scripture certainly says that the fool has said in his heart that there is no God. And then Paul did write that our universe is basically evidence for God, and that the universe itself takes away any excuse that a person may have for denying that God exists. And I'm just paraphrasing here, but that is what Paul wrote. I believe he wrote it in Romans. I'm going off the top of my head, and I don't have the verse readily available in my notes. But as we study our universe and observe it, and we see the awe and wonder and the beauty and the design, all of the life, all of the stars and things like that, I think it's just so, in my opinion, obvious that our universe could not just come into existence by accident. It was designed, and it was beautifully designed by an intelligent designer, God. He has a very creative mind and created this wonderful universe that we're living in. So that's basically the teleological argument in a nutshell. Before I close out on this video, I did want to address a couple other related subjects, and I just wanted to talk about a couple things pertaining to science. And I have my notes here, so let me just get to the proper page. So I kind of mentioned this before, but in my last video, but today, and I can speak from this when I was in college, I came across a number of readings and heard things from some of my professors that basically suggested that science and religion are incompatible. And I'm hoping that this video and my last video have done a good job showing that is just simply not true. It's the opposite. It's that science and religion, and what I mean by religion is just the existence of God, and that there's a creator and sustainer of the universe. That's all I'm intending to encompass by the term religion in this case. But science and religion are complementary. The more that we learn about science, the more clear it becomes that there is a creator and intelligent designer there is of the universe, and that there is a cause, a causing agent, a personal, timeless, spaceless, immaterial, incredibly powerful causing agent behind the universe. So this notion, this modern day notion in our society that science and religion are at odds has not always been that way. A large number of the famous scientists or fathers of certain scientific laws and principles were Christians. And I have a list here. Isaac Newton, or they were at least theists. Isaac Newton believed in God. Robert Boyle believed in God. James Maxwell believed in God. Arthur Compton believed in God. And the list goes on and on. And these scientists saw science as not in conflict with their religious views, but complementary of them. They pursued science because they had a desire to study and understand the universe that God created. So, with that said, I also wanted to address another claim that I've heard from atheists, and I've heard a lot of atheists, people like Richard Dawkins and I believe Christopher Hitchens held this view when he was alive as well, but they held the view that science can account for everything. And as I learned from William Lane Craig, science cannot account for everything. And I'd like to give some examples of things that science cannot account for. Science cannot account for morality. You cannot use the scientific method to show that one particular moral behavior is good and that another particular moral behavior is evil. Science has no realm in the subject of ethics whatsoever. And if anything, if evolution is true, that species survive just based on the survival of the fittest, then they can do immoral things. They can kill other species and murder them in order to ensure their survival. So science cannot account for morality whatsoever. Science can also not account for aesthetical claims. You can't use the scientific method to declare one thing to be beautiful and another thing to be ugly. That's something that science just cannot account for. Science also cannot account for logic and math. Science presupposes logic and math, so to try to prove logic and math by science would be arguing in a circle. And lastly, metaphysical truths cannot be proven true or false by science. Metaphysical truths like there are other minds in existence other than my own, or that the universe was not created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age. These are things that science cannot account for and yet are still rational to believe. It's rational to believe that there are other minds than my own. It's rational to believe that the universe was not created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age. Again, science cannot account for morality or aesthetical claims. It can't account for logic and math. But yet all of these things are rational to believe in. So the claim that science can account for everything is just simply untrue. And I can't help but wonder, if science can account for everything, then how does science account for that statement? I'd like to know if there's any scientific evidence to support that statement and what it would be. And if you ask them that, I don't think they're going to be able to come up with anything because, as I've just demonstrated, there are a good number of things that science cannot account for but are still rational to believe in. So another thing I wanted to talk about related to science is basically drawing a distinction between supernaturalism and naturalism. Supernaturalism is basically the view that supernatural things can occur in our universe. And by supernatural, I just mean events that have no natural explanation. So if you believe in God, then you are a supernaturalist because you recognize that God supernaturally created and designed the universe. So naturalism is the view that everything in the universe can be accounted for by natural means, that there is no supernatural activity in the universe. Everything is just natural. And some naturalists are also materialists. They deny immaterial realities. They think that everything has a material, natural explanation for its existence. And I just want to point out that naturalism is actually a self-defeating view. And bear with me here because this is a little sophisticated. I'm going to try to explain this as clearly as I can. Naturalism basically says that everything in the universe, including our own thoughts, have naturalistic means. They would say that our thoughts are really just byproducts of chemicals in our brains having a reaction and so forth. But the reason why this is self-refuting and a self-defeating view is because in the universe, there are a wide range of conflicting views that cannot all be true. Some people claim that God exists. Some people deny that God exists. God can't exist and not exist at the same time. So people have views that are true and that are false. And if all of these views are byproducts of naturalistic means, then how do we know that naturalism itself isn't one of these false views that nature resulted in? In other words, if naturalism is true, then we would believe naturalism because nature already determined that in our minds, as opposed to believing naturalism for its truth value. So hopefully that help illustrates how naturalism is a self-defeating view. Even if it was true, there'd be no way for us to know it, because we would not be able to distinguish between a true view and a false view if naturalism results in both. It would implant naturalism in our mind by naturalistic means and chemicals and molecules in motion, and therefore we couldn't believe it for its truth value. So it really is a self-defeating view. I believe that is just about everything I wanted to cover in this video. So if you've made it this far, thanks for watching. And in my next video, I plan to cover the moral argument for the existence of God. And I'm also going to address the problem of evil and a large number of objections raised against the existence of God based on the problem of evil. So if that kind of stuff interests you, stay tuned for the next video, and I'll see you guys next time.